Drama.
Oh my goodness. I know, I'm just going.
Yeah. You know all about David and his whole deal with Bathsheba and all that. And then she wound up having a son named Solomon. But some time has passed, and now David has other children by all these wives he's been taken from other places. You know, he's got wives from different countries. That's what they did back then to try to keep the peace. You know, and well, if he's married to my daughter, he ain't gonna invade my country. You know, that type of thing. That's basically what they did. And so now he's got all these children, and all these children are sisters and brothers and half sisters and half brothers and all that, you know, just going on and on and on. You in time, we just now getting started.
Chapter what?
13.
Okay.
And so, you know, it's done got very complicated. And we'll see how it turns out. All right, chapter 13, verse 1. It says, "Now Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And after a time, Amnon, David's son, loved her." So he was in love with his half-sister, basically. I guess that's what it is. I can't figure all this stuff out. Too complicated. And Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. Duh. So anyhow, he done fell in love with his half-sister here, or thought he was in love. He wasn't in love. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother. And Jonadab was a very crafty man. And he said to him, "O son of the king, why are you so haggard morning after morning? Will you not tell me?" Amnon said to him, "I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." Jonadab said to him, "Lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Let my sister Tamar come and give me bread to eat, and prepare the food in my sight, that I may see it and eat it from her hand.'" So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, "Please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my sight, that I may eat from her hand." Then David sent home to Tamar, saying, "Go to see your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him." So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, and while he was lying down, and she took dough and kneaded it and made cakes in his sight and baked the cakes. And she took the pan and emptied it out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, "Send everyone out from me." So everyone went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food into the chamber, that I may eat it from your hand." And Tamar took the cakes she had made and brought them into the chamber to Amnon her brother. But when she brought them near him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, "Come lie with me, sister." She answered him, "No, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this outrageous thing. As for me, where could I carry my shame? And as for you, you would be as one of the outrageous fools in Israel. Now therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." But he would not listen to her, and being stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. I know this is all pretty sordid stuff right here, but you remember the Lord told David through the prophet Nathan that the rest of his life there was going to be turmoil in his household. And he brought it a lot on himself. He had all these different wives and all these different children by these wives. And it's not working. Of course, and then verse 15 it says, then Amnon hated her with a very great hatred, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. So Amnon said to her, get up, go. But she said to him, no, my brother, for this is wrong, and sending me away is greater than what the other did to me. But he would not listen to her. He called the young man who served him and said, put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door after her. Now she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for thus were the virgin daughters of the king dressed. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. And Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long robe that she wore. And she laid her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. And her brother Absalom said to her, has Amnon your brother been with you? Now hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart. So Tamar lived a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house. And when David heard of all these things, he was very angry. But Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. Now one thing I noted right there, it says King David heard of all these things. He was very angry, but he didn't do nothing about it. He didn't do a thing about it. And that's why I say, in all honesty, he was a terrible father to his children. Except maybe Solomon, because Solomon was the heir, but he had all these, I guess, I hate to say it, mismatched children by all these different women. And they weren't the heirs, but they were just doing their own thing. They all did their own thing, and he didn't care. It made him mad, but not mad enough to do anything about it. You won't ever see where he said anything about this. And so what happens? We'll see right here. After 2 full years, Absalom had sheep shears at Baal Hazor, which is near Ephraim. And Absalom invited all the king's sons. 2 years had passed now, and his sister had been living with him, and David's done nothing to try to alleviate this situation. And Absalom came to the king and said, behold, your servant has sheep shears. Please let the king and his servants go with your servant. But the king said no to Absalom. No, my son, let us not all go, lest we be burdensome to you. He pressed him, but he would not go, and gave him his blessing. Then Absalom said, if not, please let my brother Amnon go with us. And the king said to him, why should he go with you? But Absalom pressed him until he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. So David was a little, skeptical about what this was all about, but he finally let him go. But David was staying home. Anyways, Absalom commanded his servants, mark when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him. Do not fear. Have I not commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant. So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons rose, and each mounted his mule and fled. While they were on the way, news came to David, Absalom has struck down all the king's sons, and not one of them is left. Then the king arose and tore his garments and lay on the earth, and all his servants who were standing by tore their garments. But Jonadab, the son of Shimei, David's brother, said, let not my lord suppose that they have killed all the young men, the king's sons, for Amnon alone is dead. For by the command of Absalom this has been determined from the day he violated his sister Tamar. Now therefore let not my lord the king so take it to heart as to suppose that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon alone is dead. And so Absalom had murdered his brother over that situation. But it says Absalom fled, and the young man who kept the watch lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, many people were coming from the road behind him by the side of the mountain. And Jonadab said to the king, behold, the king's sons have come, as your servant said, so has it come about. And as soon as he had finished speaking, behold, the king's sons came and lifted up their voice and wept. And the king also and all of his servants wept very bitterly. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. You know who these were? These were Philistines. So he fled and went to the Philistines, which were had been their mortal enemies, but also, I may be proved wrong, but I'm pretty sure that this king of Geshur is actually Absalom's grandfather, because I believe he was half Philistine because David had married one of their daughters. And David mourned for his son day after day. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years. And the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom because he was comforted by Amnon since he was dead. So he had a special love, which we'll see more and more about. He had a special love for Absalom.
Apparently he was his grandfather. It says so in 1 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 2.
That's what I thought. He went to live with his grandfather then. So David had married a woman of the Philistines who had been their mortal enemies. And, to try to make peace, I guess, as you say. So that's where he went. And then Absalom returns to Jerusalem. We'll go ahead and do this 14th chapter. Now Joab the son of Zeruiah knew that the king's heart went out to Absalom. And Joab went to Tekoa and brought from there a wise woman and said to her, pretend to be a mourner and put on mourning garments. Do not anoint yourself with oil, but behave like a woman who has been mourning many days for the dead. Go to the king and speak thus to him. So Joab put the words in her mouth. When the woman of Tekoa went to the king, she fell on her face to the ground and paid homage and said, save me, O king. And the king said to her, what is your trouble? She answered, alas, I am a widow. My husband is dead, and your servant had 2 sons, and they quarreled with one another in the field. There was no one to separate them, and one struck the other and killed him. Now the whole clan has risen against your servant, and they say, give up the man who struck his brother, that we may put him to death for the life of his brother whom he killed. So they would destroy the heir also. Thus they would quench my coal that is left, and leave to my husband neither name nor remnant on the face of the earth. Then the king said to the woman, go to your house, and I will give orders concerning you. And the woman of Tekoa said to the king, on me be the guilt, my lord the king, and on my father's house. Let the king and his throne be guiltless. The king said, if anyone says anything to you, bring them to me, and he shall never touch you again. Then she said, please let the king invoke the Lord your God, that the avenger of blood kill no more, and my son be not destroyed. He said, as the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. Then the woman said, please let your servant speak a word to the Lord, my lord the king. And he said, speak. And the woman said, why have you planned such a thing against the people of God? For in giving this decision, the king convicts himself, inasmuch as a king does not bring his banished one home again. Does this sound familiar to you? You remember when Nathan confronted David? That's what it sounds like to me right here. This woman's come in here. She's been coached, but she's come in here and she's told this story. about her sons, and now he's saying, you just let me handle this, I'll take care of it. And then she's telling him, so you're not doing that same thing with your own son. So then he says right here, or she says in verse 14, she says, we must all die. We are like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. But God will not take away life. And he devises means so that the banished one will not remain an outcast. Now I have come to say this to my lord the king, because the people have made me afraid. And your servant thought, I will speak to the king. It may be that the king will perform the request of his servant. For the king will hear and deliver his servant from the hand of the man who would destroy me and my son together from the heritage of God. And your servant thought, the word of my lord the king will set me at rest. For my lord the king is like the angel of God to discern good and evil. The Lord your God be with you. She was kind of kissing up to him a little bit then, I think. But anyhow. And then the king answered the woman, do not hide anything from me, anything I ask you. And so he says, is the hand of Joab with you in all this? The woman answered and said, as surely as you live, my lord the king, one cannot turn to the right hand or to the left from anything that my lord the king has said. It was your servant Joab who commanded me. It was he who put all these words in the mouth of your servant. In order to change the course of things, your servant Joab did this. But my Lord has wisdom like the wisdom of the angel of God to know all things that are on the earth. So now the king said to Joab, behold, now I grant this. Go, bring the young man Absalom. And Joab fell on his face to the ground and paid homage and blessed the king. And Joab said, today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord the king, and that the king has granted the request of his servant. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, let him dwell apart in his own house. He is not to come into my presence. So Absalom lived apart in his own house and did not come into the king's presence. But now we find out the rest of the story. Here's the rest of this chapter in verse 25. David's really fixing to get himself into more trouble. Now in all Israel there was no one so much to be praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head there was no blemish in him. Does that remind you of somebody? You remember Saul? Saul was a man who looked like a king. And all the people flocked to him for a while because he was head and shoulders taller than anybody, better looking than all the men in the country. They all loved him. All of them loved him. And now Absalom, he's kind of filling in that same spot right now. And he's David's son. Everybody loved him. And when he cut the hair of his head, for at the end of every year he used to cut it when it was heavy on him. He cut it. He weighed the hair of his head 200 shekels by the king's weight. I'm assuming that's pretty heavy. There was born to Absalom 3 sons and 1 daughter whose name was Tamar. She was a beautiful woman. So he had a daughter that he named after his sister. So Absalom lived 2 full years in Jerusalem without coming into the king's presence. Then Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the king, but Joab would not come to him. And he sent a second time, but Joab would not come. Then he said to his servants, see, Joab's field is next to mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire. So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab arose and went to Absalom at his house and said to him, why have your servants set my field on fire? Absalom answered Joab, behold, I send word to you, come here that I may send you to the king to ask, why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me to be there still. Now therefore let me go into the presence of the king. If there is guilt in me, let him put me to death. Then Joab went to the king and told him, and he summoned Absalom. So he went to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. So it looks like everything's working out right now, right? Nope. Wrong again. No. Absalom was about to try to usurp his own father and become the king. He was, as you can see, he was a very conniving man. Yeah, but he also used all his good looks and all that kind of stuff to try to, get himself in good graces with all the people around him. But I'd like to go ahead and just look at this other part right here, because we start going into some really good stuff right here. What time is it? Yeah, we got time. Chapter 15. After this, Absalom got himself a chariot and horses and 50 men to run before him. And Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. And when any man had a dispute to come before the king for judgment, Absalom would call them and say, "From what city are you?" And when he said, "Your servant is of such and such a tribe in Israel," Absalom would say to him, "See, your claims are good and right, but there is no man designated by the king to hear you." Then Absalom would say, "Oh, if that I were a judge in the land, then every man with a dispute or cause might come to me, that I would give him justice." See what he's doing right here? He's conniving to get power and to get people to turn to him. That's what he's up to. Plus he had all them good looks and that big hair and sitting just outside the gate where people came in. That's where the judges usually sat. But he's trying to get everybody to look his way. Whenever a man came near to pay homage to him, he would put out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. Thus Absalom did to all of Israel when he came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. You know what? I hate to say this, but that's not that hard to do. If you look through history, you can find people, if they got a silver tongue or look a certain way or say all the right things, people they'll just follow right along behind them, just like puppy dogs. And they just lead them right on into hell. And he says, at the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Please let me go and pay my vow, which I have vowed to the Lord in Hebron. For your servant vowed a vow while I lived in Geshur in Aram, saying, if the Lord will indeed bring me back to Jerusalem, then I will offer worship to the Lord." The king said to him, "Go in peace." So he arose and went to Hebron. But Absalom sent secret messages throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then say, Absalom is king at Hebron." With Absalom went 200 men from Jerusalem who were invited guests, and they went in there in innocence and knew nothing. And while Absalom was offering the sacrifices, he sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city Gilo, and the conspiracy grew strong, and the people with Absalom kept increasing. So David has to flee Jerusalem. And a messenger came to David saying, "The hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom." Then David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, "Arise and let us flee, or else there will be no escape for us from Absalom. Go quickly, lest he overtake us quickly and bring down ruin on us and strike the city with the edge of the sword." And the king's servants said to the king, Behold, your servants are ready to do whatever my lord the king decides. So the king went out and all his household after him. And the king left 10 concubines to keep the house. And the king went out and all the people after him, and they halted at the last house. So now here's the king of Israel having to flee Jerusalem, his capital, because of his son. His son's trying to overthrow him. You see what a mess he's done got into? And all his servants passed him by, and all the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and all the 600 Gittites who had followed him from Gath passed on before the king. And the king said to Ittai the Gittite, Why do you also go with us? Go back and stay with the king, for you are a foreigner and also an exile from your home. You came only yesterday, and shall I today make you wander about with us, since I go I know not where? Go back and take your brothers with you, and may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you. But Ittai answered the king, As the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king shall be, whether for life or for death or for life, there will also your servant be. And David said to him, Go then, pass on. So Ittai the Gittite passed on with all his men, and all the little ones who were with him. And all the land wept aloud as all the people passed by. And the king crossed the brook Kidron, and all the people passed on toward the wilderness. It's done got bad for David, and it's going to get worse. And Abiathar came up, and behold, Zadok came also with all the Levites, bearing the ark of the covenant of God. And they set down the ark until the people had all passed out of the city. Then the king said to Zadok, Carry the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and let me see both it and its dwelling place. But if he says, I have no pleasure in you, behold, here I am. Let him do to me what seems good to him. The king also asked Zadok the priest, Are you not a seer? Go back to the city in peace with your 2 sons, Ahimaaz your son and Jonathan the son of Abiathar. See, I will wait at the fords of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. So Zadok and Abiathar carried the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. So David went at the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went, barefoot and with his head covered. You see how humble David has gotten? The king is walking barefoot with his head covered and weeping, walking up the Mount of Olives. And all the people who were with him covered their heads, and they went up weeping as they went. I kind of think it's interesting. This is one of the worst days in David's life. And he's going up the Mount of Olives just like his progeny later on down through time. Jesus, son of David, he would go up to that Mount of Olives to pray on that last night before he was crucified. And all the people who were with him covered their heads, and they went up weeping as they went. It was a sad day. And it was told David, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. While David was coming to the summit where God was worshipped, behold, Hushai the Archite came to meet him with his coat torn and dirt on his head. David said to him, If you go on with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king, as I have been your father's servant in time past, so now I will be your servant. Then you will defeat for me the counsel of Ahithophel. Are not Zadok and Abiathar the priests with you there? So whatever you hear from the king's house, tell it to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Behold, their 2 sons are with them there, Ahimaaz Zadok's son, and Jonathan Abiathar's son. And by them you shall send to me everything you hear. So Hushai, David's friend, came to the city just as Absalom was entering Jerusalem. So you think it just can't get much more than that, as bad as it is. I want to go just a little bit further here, because we're seeing David at the depths right now. You know, and sometimes you go through stuff in your life and it just keeps piling up and piling up and piling up, and you think, how is it going to get any worse than this? You know. David had put himself in the hands of the Lord. He said, if the Lord wants me to come back, I will. If not, you know, it's over from me. He just said, whatever the will of the Lord is. And you know what? Sometimes we need to get ourselves in that same frame of mind. You know, maybe we just need to accept what God's got for us and move forward and see what it is, you know. He's going to work it toward our good one way or the other. But chapter 16, it says, when David had passed a little beyond the summit, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him with a couple of donkeys saddled, bearing 200 loaves of bread, 100 bunches of raisins, 100 of summer fruits, and a skin of wine. And the king said to Ziba, why have you brought these? Ziba answered, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine for those who faint in the wilderness to drink. And the king said, and where is your master's son? Ziba said to the king, behold, he remains in Jerusalem, for he said, today the house of Israel will give me back the kingdom of my father. Then the king said to Ziba, behold, all that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours. And Ziba said, I pay homage. Let me ever find favor in your sight, my lord the king. So he thinks he's getting a good deal right here from Ziba. But as he continues on, it says, when King David came to Bahurim, there came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. And as he came, he cursed continually. And he threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David, and all the people and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. And Shimei said as he cursed, get out, you man of blood, you worthless man. The Lord has avenged on you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. See, your evil is on you, for you are a man of blood. So this guy's throwing rocks at the king now and cursing him. So how does David react to that? Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and take off his head. But the king said, what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? If he is cursing because the Lord has said to him, curse David, who then shall say, why have you done so? And David said to Abishai and all his servants, behold, my own son seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjamite? Leave him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will look on the wrong done to me, and that the Lord will repay me with good for all his cursing today. That's interesting to me. Just let them keep talking the trash. So David and his men went on the road, while Shimei went along on the hillside opposite him, and cursed as he went, and threw stones at him and flung dust. And the king and all the people who were with him arrived weary at the Jordan, and there he refreshed himself. So just imagine yourself in that situation. Somebody just really coming down on you hard. They don't know what they're talking about. You know, there's a lot of that out there. People cursing you and saying ill stuff about you and showing ill will. And yet you know, David said, just let them keep on. Just, you know, if it works out, maybe the Lord will have mercy on me. And he said, let's see. 15. Now Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel with him. And when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, Hushai said to Absalom, long live the king, long live the king. And Absalom said to Hushai, is this your loyalty to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend? And Hushai said to Absalom, no, for whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel have chosen, his I will be, and with him I will remain. And again, whom should I serve? Should it not be a son? As I have served your father, so I will serve you. So Hushai here, he was pulling the wool over Absalom's eyes. Then Absalom said to Ahithophel, give your counsel, what shall we do? Ahithophel said to Absalom, go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house, and all Israel will hear that you have made a stench to your father, and the hands of all who are with you will be strengthened. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof. And Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Now in those days, the counsel that Ahithophel gave was as if one consulted the word of God. So was all the counsel of Ahithophel esteemed, both by David and by Absalom. Now this part right there, that's pretty sordid right there. I mean, that's pretty bad. He's wanting to make sure that everybody understands that him and his father are totally split from now on, that they can't ever get back together. And we'll stop right there. David's in bad shape, and his son is trying to take over and leave David on the outside. But you know what? As we'll find out, God is not done with David yet. Anything y'all notice or don't understand? Maybe we can try to figure out.
Makes our families not seem twice as bad.
Yeah.
You know, we think our families are pretty bad. But they're not that bad.
No, that's pretty bad right there.
Stuff started like now, but it's been going on.
Oh, yeah.
Way back.
And think about it. Everybody knew their business. I mean, it was front page.
Yeah.
You know, you choose sides. Back then, you decided.
Yeah, we got stoned, like I said.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes you get the little man running along the side of the road throwing rocks at you too.
Yeah.
Anybody have anything else? Y'all seem a little tired tonight. Is that so? All right. Terry, would you close us out, please?